Hello, and welcome to Will's Infinite Library. I am Will, and this is my infinite library. So I already did kind of a best books of 2024 video, but I wanted to make this video to kind of wrap up the year, talk about the last couple books that I've squeezed in the year, and look at my Storygraph 2024 kind of wrapped stats, because I was really diligent about tracking books there. For the first time, tracked every single book I read in 2024, so that data will actually mean something and maybe reveal some things about my reading habits that we already know. So I'm first going to just dive into the last few books I read this year, talk about those quickly, and then dive into the Storygraph pieces. Let's go. So these are a couple books that I read or I started and DNF'd, I think early in 2024, but then went back to. So the first of those is The Library at Mount Char. Originally, I stopped reading it after about 40% because I just wasn't clicking with it. I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't really care about the characters. And it was just like oppressively dark and brutal. And I just didn't want to be in that headspace. So fast forward through the entire year into like October, November, maybe. Yeah, it was because I was looking for a Halloween read. And I still kept seeing this book everywhere and was really feeling the FOMO. I really felt like I was missing out. So I picked it up again because I loved the idea of like this weird mythology, and of course libraries. I'll read anything with library in the title or about books, and this kind of idea of like what is God or a God really intrigues me. So I dove back in, and it pretty quickly clicked with me this time. I picked up where I left off. I didn't start from the beginning again, and that was probably part of it. So I had a fresh perspective diving into the middle of the book, and I slowly remembered things that had happened before, but it hadn't made much sense, so I don't feel like it made much difference. So it clicked at this point, I think because I understood that Carolyn was more the main character, because the first time I read, I was just confused jumping between characters and things. So following her and understanding what she was doing, not always why, but like understanding her motivations, like what she kind of wanted, helped a lot. And I don't know if I quite liked her because she gets caught up in this world of things that are beyond humanity, and her wants and desires become those kind of things that we can't quite understand as humans. So I don't quite know if I understood why she was doing what she was doing all of the time, but it gave me someone to follow and to not quite connect with, like I said, but like to know where I was going in the story, not even know where I was going. This doesn't make any sense, but it gave me a perspective to stick with. we'll say that. Like, I do have to mention, like, a lot of what made me bounce off this book at the first time and throughout it is that it's just so dark and disturbing overall. I think if there had been more of a sense of wonder, I would have liked it more, because there's so many cool, weird mythological things happening that I loved, but just like the heavy, dark, violent, brutal vibes just aren't my cup of tea, not something I want to occupy my headspace. The world is dark enough. But it was really interesting, and I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed it on a lot of levels, and I couldn't stop reading at a certain point, but I just couldn't quite say that I loved it because of the overall way that it made me feel. And as it went on, it got more and more, I guess, imaginative, which I really enjoyed. And even when it was darker, I felt like that was part of like the mythology. Like I don't know, like it had more reason to be there or something. I don't know. But like some of the cool ideas that I really liked were this idea of living at a different scale, because there are these themes about powerful beings that are maybe gods and experiencing trauma outside of human experience, and how gods do things for their own ends that hurt humans, and they think so differently than us that they don't even understand that humans are suffering when they cause us negative actions. So that's kind of what I picked up, is that like for the darker parts, that basically God is a cruel God but doesn't mean to be. Like, of course, beings beyond us wouldn't see things the way that we do, so that makes sense. Like, it's a cold, kind of a different universe, I guess. There was also this really cool idea of that had been something I'd been thinking about like over the past year too. I think a lot about a year ago, like last winter, was this idea of what they call regression completeness in the book. And it's the idea that no matter how many questions of the universe we answer, there will always be another mystery behind it. And so that idea really clicked with me. And then just the kind of the setting and the imaginative nature towards the end of the book was really cool. So again, glad I read it. Probably wouldn't read it again, and would be not hesitant to recommend it, but I guess I would say I'm hesitant to recommend it to people who don't generally read very dark, brutal, violent things. Like if you're used to horror and those kind of things and it sounds interesting, I think you would like it. If not, tread lightly and know that all the trigger warnings apply, like any trigger warning you can think of. This book basically, be aware. So another book in that kind of category that I think I talked about at the beginning of the year and DNF'd, but then went back to because I just saw it on my shelf and I wanted to have read it and experienced the rest of it, is The Full Moon Whaling Chronicles. This book is a wild ride. It's written in verse. It's equal parts ancient seafaring epic and imaginative sci-fi novel. It's like a mashup of so many things, of those things, but also like of these archaic and futuristic sensibilities of like verse and novel. It's not easy to read. Like, it challenged my brain to piece together the abstract lines and ideas and invented terminology, but it's something really fresh and new that makes it stand out in a world where it feels like all media or all companies producing media on a large scale are scared of taking chances or trying something new. Maybe that's always been a thing, but it seems more prevalent now when we see like these Marvel movies just kind of iterate on the same things, or not even iterate, just produce the same things, the same stories, the same characters. Like, we're on Spider-Man 27 by now. Like, we know the story. So it felt really fresh and new in those terms. I loved, again, kind of similar to Mount Char, I loved the sci-fi ideas and this wild new technology that's invented in the book. It also plays with scale, which is an interesting parallel too, and also metafiction. And it's kind of clearly a story within a story, but you don't really know why or what's happening until later on it gets really interesting and does interesting things with that I really thought was cool and was probably my favorite part of the whole book. And once I kind of realized that was what happened, as I kind of skimmed to see if I wanted to read again, I was like, oh, this is something that I want to read to get to. So I really enjoyed that. My main complaint, I think, with this and a lot of books I've been reading lately, which is probably a me thing then, is that it felt too long and often kind of constrained by the verse, but it had moments where it really shone. So it might have just needed that. It had a beautiful opening, a beautiful closing, some really cool ideas in the middle. But like, I feel like it could have really been something extra special if it was maybe a novella length or just shorter, because you just get bogged down in all of the choppiness of the verse that I think is an iambic pentameter, and it flows nicely, but it also doesn't in a lot of ways that I found it really slowing down my reading, even though there's like a fewer text on the page than an average page because it's in these shorter lines. It was kind of a challenge to read, which I think fit it well, but just know that going into it, it's not a quick, easy read. Like, it kind of starts to feel like at the beginning, as it's kind of sing-songy and you see less text. It is a challenge, but I think I would recommend it if you're interested in this kind of thing, in books that really do something quite different. Just be aware that you're in for a kind of longer ride than you might think going into it. And then the last book to mention, I talked a bit about some YA books I read recently. I picked up the second book of the Legendborn series, Bloodmarked. I don't have a lot to say about it. It was a fun continuation of the story. The thing I liked most about it was that there are different magic systems in the first book and the whole series, I think. And it did a really good job of explaining the connections between them, because in the first book, that was one of my complaints. I was like, why are there so many different magic systems? And like, what, like, how does magic work in this world if it works in different ways? But anyway, they kind of tie that together here. And overall, it was really enjoyable and just the right amount of, I think, weight to be meaningful while still maintaining the fun factor that is found in the first book. One of the other things I really liked was that there was a more focused group of main characters, because that was the other thing I struggled with in the first book. There were so many characters. It's a lot more focused in this one on some main characters. Again, it felt kind of long to me, which again is feeling like a me thing, which kind of threw off the pacing for me. But if you love it and you want more of it, you get more of it, right? So not really a negative, just again a thing to be aware of if you're interested. It's a long book. Yeah, so that was what I read the last few books in 2024. So now let's jump over to Storygraph and take a look at the year at a glance. So I read 42 books this year, which was more than I expected. I think I usually read around 50 books a year, and I was kind of expecting to read less this year. And I initially set a goal of 25 books because I wanted to meet a goal, and I wanted to read a little slower and be more intentional about what I was reading. So I'm very happy with reading 42 books in the year. Some might say that number holds the meaning to life, the universe, and everything. My average time to finish is 6 days. That's meaningless because I didn't track when I started very well or even finished sometimes. My moods were mostly adventurous, which is typical for my reading for some reason. Mysterious came in at 17 books. Oh, adventurous was 32 books. That was all but 10 of the books I read were adventurous. I don't know how meaningful these things are because Storygraph, if you're not familiar with it, kind of like auto tags things. I don't know if it's based, it might just be based on users ranking it, but like I didn't create these tags. And like, I don't think the publishers created these tags. So I think you have to take them with a grain of salt, but it's interesting overall. Pacing, 71% of the books I read had medium pace. Sounds good to me. I want to read medium pace books. I think fast pace was 28%. I do like fast pace too. And slow pace was 2%, which snore. Page number, 64% with 300 to 499 pages. That sounds right. 17%, which were 7 books, were over 500 pages. That surprises me. And 19%, 8 books were under 300. And then it says 98% of the books I read were fiction, and 2%, which was 1 book, was nonfiction. What was the nonfiction book I read? I don't know. It doesn't show me here. Uh-oh. Okay, now it's loading. The nonfiction book I read was Time as a Mother, which I guess makes sense. It's like a book of poetry, but it's based on real life, so I guess that makes sense. Getting back into the genres, this is the thing that I was most curious to see because I've been kind of exploring genres lately, and when I think about what I'm reading, and fantasy came out huge at the top at, this doesn't give a percent, but 32%, which we know from previous stats in adventurous is, we don't know. It doesn't have a percentage there, but an overwhelming majority, 32 books out of 42, which aligns with the adventurous thing. So I think that's the same thing, really. And I read across genres a lot, which you know if you've watched this channel before. So I think the fantasy books I read, a lot of these are, urban fantasy or straight up fantasy, but a lot of them are bridging the gap with other genres. So I think that's why I love fantasy in combination with things. I don't read a lot of like high fantasy or straight up fantasy, but I did explore a lot of urban fantasy this year too, which I think really bumped that up. LGBTQIA+ is 9 books, which again overlap with everything else. Young adult is also 9, which overlaps with fantasy a lot, I think, as well. Science fiction came in at 6. I haven't been reading a lot of sci-fi this year. I often flip-flop between sci-fi and fantasy. Literary is 4, again, probably overlapping with fantasy. And then the other ones are really small, like short stories, poetry, mystery. These are all like 2 books. And then a few are 1, which I don't take much stock in. And then it has tags, which I don't think really means anything. I read 3 books tagged as fantasy, so I don't know what this means if I read mostly fantasy. Format, print versus digital, I didn't track, so this is meaningless. But I would be curious to know, because I went through phases this year of reading paper and ebooks off and on. Most read authors is pretty interesting. These were ones I was kind of diving into. Christopher Moore, I read 3 books because I was trying to kind of explore his writing. I actually just started reading Lamb, so we'll see where that goes. It's kind of hit or miss for me, so I'll see if I get into that one. Fonda Lee, 3 books reading the Greenbone saga. Chadwick Ginther, 3 books reading the Thunder Road series. TJ Klune, I guess because I just read 2 new TJ Klune books, which was Under the Whispering Door. No, not Under the Whispering Door. Maybe. Was that the first one? I guess it was. And then Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Jim Butcher, I read a couple of the Dresden Files books. Daniel Jose Older, because I finished off the Bone Street Roomba series. David R. Slayton, because he had a couple new books this year. N.K. Jemisin, because I read The City We Became and its follow-up. Tracy Dion, because of Legendborn series. And Terry Pratchett, because I was exploring Discworld. Another one which I think I explored humor a lot this year, because I thought that's where I wanted to go with my own writing, and I thought I would enjoy it, but I struggle with it. There are moments that I really enjoy, but I find a lot of it to be a slog. I think I appreciate humor more in shorter doses than an entire novel. This is a funny one because it's also meaningless. Languages I read in, I didn't track. I read fully in English this year. Last year I read several books in Portuguese. Actually, I read a little in Portuguese this year, which I didn't track because it was like a comic book and then like a piece of a nonfiction book. Like just different little sections. But anyways, this says I read 97.6% of my books in English and 2.4% one book in Albanian, which I did not do. It says that was Jitterbug Perfume, which I reread this year. I did not read it in Albanian. So 100% of the books I read were in English this year, except for those couple that were in Portuguese. Number of books and pages, 42 books, like I said, 16,133 pages. There were a lot of longer books. That is surprising to me. I did not think I had read this many pages. And then reviews, actually, which was what I was most curious to see. I'm missing one. It says 41 reviews. I have to check what I'm missing. My average rating is 4.04 stars. And I have a lot of 5-star books, so let's take a look at those. My 5-star books this year were The City We Became, Dark Moon Shallow Sea, The World We Make, Good Omens, The Sleeping Car Porter, Rogue Community College, The Full Moon Whaling Chronicles, The Raven Boys, Jitterbug Perfume, The Fascinators, Tombstone Blues, Time as a Mother, and Too Far Gone. Interesting. That is quite interesting. And then I had 13 4-star reviews, the same as 5 stars. So that's a lot of the books I read. Over half were like pretty high. And then 7 3.5s, which is a lot of mid-star ratings for me. I usually don't think in those terms. And then 8 at 3 stars. And I don't think I had anything below that, which is really good. Because 3, I think I'm pretty happy having read a 3-star book. There were no books this year that I was like, this is terrible. There were some I struggled with, like you saw that I talked about in this video, but eventually finished and then quite enjoyed or got something good out of them. So that was my 2024 in review from Storygraph. I don't think I'll track again this year. This was just kind of a fun experiment, and I kind of knew everything that came out of it, except for the star ratings I found pretty interesting, but I think Goodreads tracks that just as well, if not better. And a lot of this data is kind of chaotic based on data that is just automatically put into the books you read. So this was fun, a fun experiment to show that I read a lot of fantasy this year more than anything, and a lot of good books. But anyways, I'd be curious to hear what you read this year. What were some of your favorite books? What kind of trends did you notice in your own reading? And what kind of goals are you going to set for 2025? I think for me, it's going to be read more books that, how do I put this? That like grip me right away. Like don't slog through long books, but read the books that I feel like, the books that you just feel the strong energy from the first page. I want to find more books like that and read more books like that and spend less time reading books that I think I should read, which is kind of always my goal and always the struggle, because there's so many books that you just feel the FOMO for, and you're like, oh, everybody's reading this book. And the phrase I kept finding myself saying this year was, I want to have read this book, and I want to have that experience. And I want to force myself less to do that and more to read the books that I really am going to get something out of, that are going to make me feel something, that have this energy and this power, rather than books that I think I want to have read, whatever that really means. Anyways, yeah, let me know in the comments below what you read this year and what you enjoyed. And have a happy, safe, and healthy end of your holiday season. Happy New Year and a great start to the next year. I'll see you next time.